All right. Hello, everyone. Jen here to introduce our special presentation for today. Quick housekeeping, because I always forget this part. We are paying attention to Facebook, so please feel free to make comments, ask questions. We will do a Q&A at the end. So we're paying attention, ask your questions, and we'll get to them, I promise. As for today's presentation, if you've ever wondered how your small business can incorporate some type of company culture, that is the question that's going to be answered today. Our speaker, Nat Measley, is from Your Culture Design, which is a totally new organization, but Nat himself has over 20 years of experience working in this kind of wacky, unusual industry. And I'm actually going to let Nat tell you more about it because I don't know a whole lot about culture design, and I am really excited to learn about it today.
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks, Jen. And I am nervous. We were just talking about how nervous we both are. I'm so nervous to hopefully help a little bit to answer this question about how small businesses can really leverage this concept of culture, which I think is typically reserved for, you hear the word corporate culture all the time, bigger businesses and all of that. But yeah, it's an honor to be here and a pleasure. And I hope that I can really help everyone out there today. And since Jen's looks like she's paused maybe or is muted, she's back. She's alive.
Oh, sorry about that. So I guess to get us started, Nat, why don't you give us the definition of what company culture is?
Yeah, sure. So it's actually a kind of a complex definition. If you just Google academia or just Google the word culture, it talks about the norms and cultures that make up individual societies or groups of people. And there is no one single definition of culture, but what I found is when you add that layer of corporate or workplace culture to it, it can get that much more complex because there's all these things that are floating around and factors in our minds when we think about culture at work, right? So it's something that's a little bit different. To me, I think if I could define it myself, I would say culture is exactly what the people who are involved in that culture want it to be or feel they have the ability for it to be. And so I didn't get to too much of my history and background, but for a little bit more than 15 years officially, I had an odd, interesting career working with a company, and I was their executive in charge for a couple of years called the fund department. And we would walk into some of the biggest businesses in the country. We did some international work, and we talked with some of their top executives and leaders all about fun and what made for a great culture. And consistently, the leaders that understood the culture wasn't about them were the ones that were seeing the better outcomes. So that's my definition, of workplace or corporate culture is really, it is what the people want to make it.
Okay, well, I guess that's, you kind of answered the question that I was going to ask, but kind of building on that, do you notice patterns in what people typically say they want their cultures to be built around? Are there like some main factors or things that you would say, even if your employees didn't say this, you should probably include it?
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, there's a ton of great research. There's lots of great resources. There's lots of great consultants and supporters out there who have been studying this concept of workplace culture for a long time. One thing I point to, if people are more academic or want to look into the reading, is Gallup's Q12. So Gallup.com, large statistical group, they found there are 12 main factors that actually affect an individual employee's engagement. And if you consider engagement being a piece of a culture, if you have a group full of engaged employees versus disengaged or even actively disengaged employees, of course, you can expect the culture would be, I don't know, subjectively better versus worse. But those 12 factors include things like, I have a best friend where I work, or I feel recognized for good work that I do. There's a whole line of researchers that I'm closely connected to that look at motivation in the workplace. So what does motivate you as an individual employee. And thus, the thing that we look at is how does that really affect your culture?
Yeah. I know when we talked the other day, you had said something about tying employee satisfaction to the results of the company. Do you mind, I guess, kind of just explaining that concept to this audience?
Yeah, absolutely. In all of our work, we saw companies what I would call smart spending on culture, and some not so much. And I think smart spending time, resources, and money is really important to understand. And there's some really great examples. I can share some of those case studies with you of organizations, nonprofits, large companies, small companies, and how they've actually tried now, it's sort of a trend that I've seen, to leverage their culture to make money. And I thought I'd give at least one great example, and it's a local group actually to us here in the Philadelphia region called the Be Positive Foundation. So they were an early adopter of yourculturedesign.com and some of our concepts, and we worked with them to develop a means or a way that we could showcase their culture, and they had defined their goal and outcome of this work as they wanted to raise more money for their cause. And Be Positive is a phenomenal organization. They raise money to fight childhood cancer, and they fight it aggressively. And they are mostly student run at various universities around the country. So through lots of creative conversation, lots of consultative work, and some of our process through design thinking, like rethinking your culture, but through this design lens, we help them to create and write and edit and publish a book that's now available on Amazon that highlights their culture, and they use that book as a fundraiser for their nonprofit. The cool and most interesting piece of that book is it was written by 60 plus of their student leaders, their sponsors. A few of the kids actually did the cover for the book. So some of the kids that came to their big dance marathon that they did at a local university. So they, I mean, talk about like finding a way to highlight your culture and use it to monetize. It was a phenomenal job. And so I think for small businesses who are listening to this, you know, about how to externalize your culture, which is what we really want to talk about. You think internal culture, so all of us in this room, our small team. What about including community members, sponsors, partners, part-time employees, interns, everyone, and see what their ideas are? And that's what we really focus on.
Yeah. So I know this is a sidetrack, but with that book that they're selling, it's just about their culture. It's not like a how-to or an educational thing.
Right.
Like what's the, I don't know, the what's in it for them, for the people buying it, I guess.
Yeah, it's filled with these great stories. Most often, the people that bought it are people that are closely connected to the organization.
Okay.
But the reasons that they had chosen to do it were twofold. Number one was they wanted to engage that population of people in their culture, which they did because they went to these people and said, "Hey, don't you want to help us write our book about Be Positive and the dance marathon?" And they said, "I'm sorry, I'm an author? Yes, I would love to write about myself and my story," which shouldn't be too surprising. And so that was one of their like main reasons. And so what happened from that is, yes, they made a little bit of money in fundraising on the books, but most importantly, they re-engaged some of their top fundraisers, some of their top sponsors and connections.
Okay. Got it.
So
Got it.
in the future, they could see it, and we discussed this creatively for the next year that they're doing the same dance marathon, actually selling sponsorships for this book. So
Okay.
this year,
Very
will be a
cool.
book sponsored by, you know, whatever local bank they could solicit.
Yeah. Our audience is mostly small businesses, but I was at the Dana Impact Conference this morning. So
Oh, cool.
I'm like, oh, I got to tell the nonprofits about this.
Yeah, absolutely. It was
um,
a neat project. It really was a highlight of a great culture that exists already, but they really leveraged that, and I think that was important.
yeah, that's awesome. Okay, well, we are going to get into external culture, but first, kind of another sidetrack. Or segue. Um, we've been talking about like building the culture with the people that you have already. How do
Mhm.
you make sure that you bring on new people who fit your culture or who you know are going to add the right things to your culture?
Yeah, that's interesting. I've seen a lot of work, and I can give a big shout out to the fund department, where I used to be a partner, and one of their partners with Delivering Happiness, which is a training program that was founded through the lens of looking at Zappos.com and their culture. And so I think I can't best answer that question, but a gentleman who could is someone that I got to interview probably 6 or 7 years ago, named Tony Shea. And Tony was the founder at Zappos.com. And I asked him that exact question because they had this culture that they claimed was wild and creative and insane, and you had to be weird to work there. But their definition of weird was you just got to fit with what we're doing. And I asked him that, and he said, yeah, we are willing to turn down the top best Harvard grad for someone else if that best top Harvard grad or engineer or whatever doesn't fit who we are as people in our culture. And so one of the main steps that I mentioned, and we'll work through, we're going to do a workshop next week. We'll work through this actually, is connecting to what I would say is the right people. So for a small business, yes, when you sit down with someone, define what your culture is through core values, through what your mission is. And if you find someone doesn't fit that, like even if they're awesome and amazing at what they do, it could be a risk. It could be a risk culturally later. So I give the props to the fund department and to Zappos because they do that work. They work on redefining core values at the highest levels with some of the biggest companies in the land. And so I think finding and hiring the right people that fit what your defined core values, like what do you really care about? I have a notebook, and as we've been founding yourculturedesign.com, one of the first things I wrote down, and it's because I've had this experience, was what are my core values? What do I really care about? And so one of the top things is service and giving back to community. And so I want to find people who recognize that part of our outcome at Your Culture Design is to actually make money to fund businesses that have a social mission written into their code and their core values.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Funny timing, because my partner Jane and we just finished up with we're a new company too. We started in February, and we only just finished the paperwork to become a legal entity.
Yeah.
But yeah, that whole process of working through, we call it our brand book, with our voice and our messaging and who we are online and how we show up and what kinds of words do we use.
Yeah,
so
it all matters. And part of that is strategic as well, because with everything happening in the world right now, if you don't want to be a part of a conversation about social justice, social injustice, if you don't want to find the organizations and the groups and the companies that are willing to have that conversation and work through it, then truthfully, I don't want you to work for me. But if you're willing to do it, great. Let's have a conversation and talk about it. So
yeah. Okay, I was going to take a tangent, but you know what? Won't go there. So we talked about people within your company and bringing people on, but what about for, our small business audience? What can they do to, establish a company culture? Say it's using our own company as an example. There's 2 full-time employees, and then we have a handful of part-time employees and contractors. Mm-hmm. So what steps could we take?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And I think the easiest answer is to go back to the process that we work through at yourculturedesign.com, which is really applying a simple model of design thinking to building a culture. And the first step, and we actually teach some of this at university. I teach a course on entrepreneurship and some on workplace culture. And there's 3 main, there's different definitions of it, but categories or steps within design thinking: inspiration, ideation, and implementation. So in the inspiration phase, if you're applying this to where do you start with culture, it's really about identifying what the goals of your culture are going to be. So you've defined, your core values and who you're going to be. Now you're going to start to actually build culture things. And so you have to figure out what you want out of those culture things, whether it be events or something else. In the ideation phase, include the voice of everyone. And so as it applies, as you're asking to your small team and a handful of employees, have a workshop where you invite your top clients and your whole team and just let people talk about what should our culture be? What should we do next week for culture? And just shut up and see what happens. Like step back and listen. And if you're able to identify something that really, fits for that outcome or whatever that goal is you define in the first phase of this design thinking principle, that's great. And then my last thing is just test it, try it out. That's implementation in the design thinking process. So really, if someone says, well, I don't know, I think we should do a virtual, 15-minute hand sanitizer. I'm here in a film and design studio space downtown, and so we're all safe. We're all far apart from each other. There's hand sanitizer all over the place. We're all doing it all the time. Like, let's have a 15-minute, sanitizing session as a team. What's the harm? Can't hurt anyone. It's virtual. Sanitize your workstation. Have everyone on the Zoom call like this, sanitizing whatever they want. Be creative and be fun. There you go. Done. And if I'm your employee, Jen, and you say, Nat, that's the dumbest idea ever. We're not doing that next week. 15-minute sanitizing session. Come on. What are you thinking? Well then, okay, sorry. Like, I'll never come up with anything creative ever again.
Right.
So I think really thinking through, you have to be willing, and especially you might as well do it with your culture. You have to be willing to test and try it out. I mean, some of the best, biggest companies are super inefficient, but they're always changing and innovating, and that's the point of it. So same thing with your culture. Try things, test things. You know what the limits are. Don't go over the line. Don't be a jerk.
Yeah. Well, maybe we don't know what the limits are if we just started.
If that fits your culture, that's true.
Yeah.
Learn the limits, I guess.
Yeah. I guess establish them by learning them.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, good question. So we have Emily Martin. How do you build a company culture virtually?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's been a popular question with a lot of people. I think my best advice is still going back to start to understand what people say their virtual work environment is like. So you can do this through traditional, depending on how big your company is, traditional, employee surveys, let's say. And the trend, it's been a few years now, but the trend is going away, by the way, from the once or twice a year, employee survey. And one of the reasons is, and we witnessed this live, so many companies were doing the pizza party on Monday because the survey was on Tuesday. And forget about what happened in November. It's pizza party time and the survey's tomorrow. Like, oh, okay. But there's a lot of great survey companies, some actually local to where we are in the Philadelphia region, that the trend is moving more towards pulse surveys. So getting a sense of what people want, what they need, what they like, what they hate. It's really brilliant. Actually, through the month of July, through your culture design, we piloted a program called the Global Culture Data Map, which was a fully open source survey. We sent it out to a couple of our connections and clients and said, fill this out as much as you want or as little as you want. 3-question survey. And we asked people what their virtual work environments were like and how they build a culture. And what we heard back were things like, I actually miss seeing my leaders in the hallway. That was one that really stood out to me. Like, I miss seeing my manager and leaders in the hallway. And I stopped and thought, well, then the answer for that company and their culture is do more leader and manager one-on-ones like this. Set the timeline. They don't have to be long. They can be quick. But if you're not already doing that, so I think to go back to answer Emily's original question, it's about really going back to understanding what people need in their virtual environment, their virtual space. And then if you can cater to that, that's great. If you can leverage it, that even better. So
yeah. And maybe in this case, it's almost a benefit to have such a small team, because a big company has to rely on surveys, or they have to get like all the managers reporting their direct reports. But if you're a small business, if you've got 5 employees, you can actually talk to them all.
Yeah. I mean, I heard from a former partner of ours not too long ago, whose daughter works in New York City for a large real estate company, that once their lease is up, they are not renewing their lease. And we're talking about like 1,000 employees in Manhattan. The reason is it's crazy expensive. So small businesses right now have a chance to leverage their business operation, their culture. they have a chance to be right there, because we're all working just like this. I was on a call just like this 3 weeks ago with a few other people in California who are like in the HR space and training space. And one of them was the HR director for Pixar was on this call with us.
Wow.
Cool, that's cool, that's cool. They're doing exactly what we're doing. You got kids crying in the back. You got like charts up and makeshift dry erase boards. They show up in their friends, office space. They're spaced out. It's like, it's interesting, right? We're all very equal right now, I think. So there's a real chance for small businesses to leverage that.
Yeah, that's a good point. I love that. Yeah, we're all equal now. Does everyone hear that?
Yeah.
It's our chance to make small business really happen. Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. Nat, remind me, did you have a time limit? Because we're going over 20 minutes now.
No, I don't, but I'm happy to take any other questions for sure.
Okay. Yeah, so quick reminder, guys, if you've got questions, chime in. And, Jean just joined. Jean, we're still here. We're talking culture design. I know you missed the beginning, but if you have questions, please feel free to chime in. Nat, did you have anything you wanted to touch on that I didn't ask you? I know you said you have a few case studies.
Yeah. I think the big concepts that we kind of touched on are still, just to reiterate, as a good professor would at the end of class, like smart spending on culture is really important, especially in today's world. Connecting to the right people that fit your core values, whether that be new employees, new team members, vendors, partners, or clients. Go find those right people that fit what you want your culture to be. You have control over it. And this simple system of inspiration, ideation, and implementation, the 3 phases that we actually teach at university about design thinking, you can apply them to building a culture too. It's easy to apply that theory, I think, often for people to a physical object like this, this hand sanitizer pump. Why does it work? Why doesn't it work? Well, let's redesign it. It's the same thing for culture. Some of it works, some of it doesn't. So you can always be redesigning and changing and testing and trying.
I know we've already talked about design thinking, but do you mind giving a simple definition, if there is one, of just what design thinking is?
Yeah, sure. Through some of it, we actually introduce it in some of the entrepreneurship courses that we teach, because we want entrepreneurs to be able to practice it. And it really is just a theory in how to think, to identify and solve problems. I mean, that's, to me, all the definitions kind of fall into that single bucket. There's hundreds of definitions for it as well. But it's really a system to use to be able to think big to solve problems.
Okay. Yeah, I was kind of asking for myself because I've seen the prevalence of design thinking as a term used all over the place. And I'm like, oh, I'm a designer. I should know what that means. But I don't know how that applies outside of like work or like an actual design.
Yeah, there's actually some great like video content out there, some great TEDx speakers from the past who are like high level design thinkers.
Yeah.
So I can share that with you. You can share it with the group. I think that would be great.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. And so we'll share, I guess, a few different links because we talked about Gallup. We talked about, do you mind sharing the book from the nonprofit that you talked about?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I'll send that link for sure.
Yeah. So Nat's going to send me all the links and I will share them on Facebook. And if you missed the beginning, what was that?
This is just like class. Everyone, your homework is now to go read these 15 articles, summarize them. Come on, no, just kidding.
Yeah. You do have homework. Actually, what your homework is to attend the workshop that Nat is going to tell you about right now.
Yeah, awesome. So next Friday, August 28th at 12 o'clock Eastern time, we're going to host an hour-long workshop on this. So we're going to actually take you through an early iteration of what your mission and core values are. And then we're going to work in small groups, and we're going to do it virtually on Zoom to start to design your culture. So taking this theory of design thinking and actually applying it to you and your team. So we'll identify, what your outcome goals are. If you were to design a culture, what would you want it to be? And I'm going to push you to say your culture should be making you money, right? Like how we'll figure that out, but that should be one of your goals. We're going to include the voice of who your people are and set up maybe some systems for you on how to do that. And then I hope you walk away with at least one thing that you can test at the end of this hour. So I was telling Jen in my very weird career, I've been all over and I've been able to interact with lots of interesting people. And one of my favorites was actually building a workshop for a company years ago with a gentleman named Bob Silsley, who was the training director for Hamburger University for McDonald's. And he always told me, if we're going to promote that we're doing a workshop, people better be working. Because we used to do workshops for McDonald's and they would be making the fries and the Big Macs and 2 shakes of salt. And if they did 3, we'd shut them down. So we're going to put you to work next Friday. It'll be less me talking and more you thinking and creating working small groups. So we'll share the link for that, Jen. And then all of the workshops we do ever for public are completely free. For this one, there's a suggested donation amount, and we're going to donate all the proceeds to the Ronald McDonald House charities of the Philadelphia region, because we've been working on a fundraiser with them over the last month. So $0 to 10,000, whatever you want to donate to come attend next Friday, we'll send that link.
Yeah, definitely check that out, guys. Oh, you know what? Do you mind answering another question?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so Jean asks, how can you build a strong company culture without killing diversity?
That's a great question. Without killing diversity was the question?
Yeah, or maybe and embrace diversity, however you want to phrase it.
Yeah. I mean, I think that that's a tough, interesting question. I think I would have to maybe I'll defray that question to partners of ours at a group called the Alley. An old friend of mine, Daniel Farmer, who actually is quarantined and stuck in Taiwan right now, but has founded some anti-racist trainings. I think if part of your core values and mission and vision around what you want to do is focused on diversity, then finding people that share that same thought will take care of that over time within your culture. If that's one of your focal points of your culture. So I think it goes back to that same system and process, right? Identify what you really want, figure out what you can get out of it, how to leverage it, and then run your culture through design thinking and not be afraid to make a mistake. But I'd be happy. Let's do another link. I'll send a link for Daniel. He'd actually be a great presenter specifically on that. Like diversity in cultures is what he consults on. He has a fascinating background and story, and his group's called the Alley. So they'd be great to connect to on that specific question.
Yeah, we have been meaning to get a diversity, equity, and inclusion speaker in the group. So if you know someone who'd be willing to talk, that'd be great. The ones that I've talked to already have been like speakers. That's what they do for a living. So they're like, you're going to pay me, right? And I'm like, oh.
Yeah. Daniel works boots on the ground consulting with groups similar to what we do. So there's a partnership there.
Okay.
I'm sure he'd be happy to share some of the things he's done, some of the stories.
Okay. Well, so Jean, hopefully that was helpful as far as, reinforcing your core values and making sure that you're using those to build your team. And then, hopefully we can eventually get someone in here who can speak about DEI more specifically. I promise you guys, I'm working on it, have been for over a month. Okay. Well, unless I don't see any more questions popping up, thank you so much, Nat. And again, everyone, please think about attending this workshop. I'm really excited about it. I'm definitely signing up. And Ronald McDonald House is such a great charity too. I have volunteered there preparing meals for the families, and it's just, the service they provide, giving people a place to stay that's close to where their children are receiving treatment, and like keeping those families together of those sick kids. There is very little that is more rewarding than that. So great cause. You're going to learn so much for your company. Definitely attend this workshop.
Yeah, thanks so much. Yeah, and I'll leave with this application for us of culture for small businesses to include your partners, your part-timers, interns, clients, and vendors in your local community. It's also something that's fairly new and budding. And so head to yourculturedesign.com and set up a discovery session with us. And I'd love to hear how you want to apply it. I'd love to hear just more about, my job is to get out there and see what's happening in the real world. So whatever you took away from today, good, bad, or ugly, we want to know. So hopefully
All right. Have a great weekend, everyone.